Hello, it's Alec Kerr, the film critic for the Conway Daily Sun. I realize I've been MIA from YouTube for quite some time now. I don't really have a good reason. Just kind of fell out of habit of it. I know I've said this a couple times now where I'm going to, try to come back and do this more often, but combination of the holidays and just, not getting into the routine again. So, to make up for lost time, I'm going to kind of begin a series now. I don't know how many entries there'll be in it. I'm just gonna, as the year goes on, just as things occur to me, I'll try to do them. Hopefully, I don't do it the whole year. Just maybe for the first month or two. Just kind of looking back at the last decade, whatever it's called. I think it's called the aughts, but we'll just call it the double O's or something like that. But this last decade, a lot of people in the media are calling it, the decade from hell, and just a very dark, bleak time. But I don't want to talk about any of that. I just want to talk about some of the interesting things that were going on in terms of movies, or maybe some people that have been forgotten and why they were forgotten and what happened to their careers and everything. So the first person I want to talk about is Richard Kelly. Now here's somebody who back in 2001 with Donnie Darko just seemed to be this new, fresh voice. I mean, he was doing something a little bit different. I mean, it wasn't like it was groundbreaking, but he was doing this kind of enigmatic, ambiguous kind of storytelling, but also really kind of sharp and funny, and you didn't really know what was going on, but there was just something about it that was really compelling. And it's one of the films that helped launch Jake Gyllenhaal, and Maggie Gyllenhaal was also in it as well, and so it just seemed like he was going to be one of those, first-time directors that you would watch and just see if he blossomed or see if he was kind of just a one-hit wonder. And unfortunately, increasingly, it's looking like he really was kind of just a one-hit wonder. He made two other movies in the decade that he wrote and directed, and he also wrote the screenplay for Tony Scott's Domino, which is probably the only other film of his that's kind of marginally successful. I mean, it's a mess of a movie, but it doesn't follow the gimmickry that's in Donnie Darko and all of his other movies. And Donnie Darko is fresh, but he just seems to keep rehashing it in Southland Tales and The Box, which was his other two movies. In Domino, he was doing an adaptation of somebody's life. It was based on true story, so he couldn't throw a lot of his kind of philosophical science mumbo-jumbo jargon in there. And so while it is kind of borderline incoherent and just a mess of a movie, it is kind of entertaining. You have Keira Knightley as a bounty hunter, Domino Harvey, playing against her type and doing it well, and she's ably supported by like the likes of Mickey Rourke and Lucy Liu and Christopher Walken. And it's one of the few times where Tony Scott's this really hyper-kinetic style of filmmaking that he's been developing for several films really works and meshes with the material. So it's not a great movie, but it works. But Southland Tales, I think it's one of those perfect examples of the sophomore film of a filmmaker where the studio just throws a bunch of money at him, and he has the clout from that first film to just get all these big names in the movie. I mean, everybody seemed to be in that movie. You had The Rock, you had Seann William Scott, you had Sarah Michelle Gellar, Mandy Moore, Kevin Smith popped up, Christopher Lambert from the Highlander movies was in there, a bunch of Saturday Night Live cast members. I mean, the thing was huge cast, and it was like 2.5 hours of just bloated, incoherent nonsense, and you kind of going along with it for a while, hoping that it's going to connect, and it winds up at the end that he just uses the same time travel gimmick that he used in Donnie Darko, and it's just a massive letdown. And so when trailers for The Box came out, it looked like he was doing a more straightforward thriller, and that was intriguing. It was an intriguing premise based on a Richard Matheson short story called Button Button, of a family that's approached by this stranger with a button. If you press the button, you will kill somebody you don't know, but you'll receive $1 million. And that seemed like a really kind of interesting premise for like a Hitchcockian or Twilight Zone-esque story. In fact, it was used as a Twilight Zone episode in the 80s revival. But unfortunately, after he sets up the initial premise and the pressing of the button, it goes off into his same kind of science, philosophical, bullshit. And, excuse the language. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, he just ruined a perfectly good suspense premise by loading it up with all this, nonsense that it confuses, but it doesn't confuse in a good way. I just recently watched the Charlie Rose interview with Quentin Tarantino when Pulp Fiction came out, and he talked about how if you're confused, but you feel like you're in good hands, then you're okay with it. But he said the minute he feels confusion, it just snaps him out of the movie and he loses interest. And I think that's what happens with Southland Tales and The Box. You just don't feel like you're in good hands. You don't feel like anything's happening. But in the case of Donnie Darko, you seemed like there was a little bit more control there, so you didn't really know what was going on, but you were willing to go along with it because it just seemed like it was going somewhere. And even that's one of those movies where you still talk about it and you don't ever figure it out. But maybe because it was the first time you were seeing it, it was kind of fresh. Same thing with like M. Night Shyamalan with The Sixth Sense. First time he did his whole horror, suspense movie with a twist, it was really, really strong and fresh. It worked again in Unbreakable, but then all of those subsequent films like The Village and The Happening and all those, it's just a gimmick. And it's like that first film, whether it's Donnie Darko or The Sixth Sense, where it was really, really well done. And then all the subsequent films seem to be trying to rehash that without adding anything new to it. And so I think, Richard Kelly is very much in the same kind of boat as M. Night Shyamalan, where he needs to get outside of his comfort zone. Maybe he just needs to direct a piece instead of writing and directing, or maybe he needs to do an adaptation of a book and not try to make it his own thing so aggressively. Maybe he should just try to do a straightforward adaptation of something. I don't know, but Richard Kelly is just one of the big disappointments of the decade. Someone coming out with a lot of promise and then wasting it. So this is the first installment of my series of looking back at the first decade of the 21st century. And yeah, so this is Alec, and keep watching.